So hello and welcome to this June 6th, 2022 meeting for the Logistics and Distribution Industry Sector Council. For the record, I'm Amy Fleming, Program Development and Engagement Specialist for the Governor's Office of Workforce Innovation. We will go through a roll call now. I will say I do know we have a number of members, voting members, that are missing this morning due to it being summer now, and also travel plans that have changed and a number of things. So I'm anticipating we will have some absences there, but just wanted to let you know in advance. So let me know when you are when you hear your name called that you're present. And again, these are the voting members, and I'll give a quick recap of what that means afterward. So Mark Janung, I know he's traveling. Dong Min, Scott Mulrath,
Present.
Dale South, Gary Watson,
Present.
Amy Williams, and Perry Williams. All right, so I hereby, I affirm that this June 6, 2022 Logistics and Distribution Industry Sector Council meeting has not reached a quorum, but what that means is that we won't be able to vote on any items that have been agendized for action. And for this meeting, that is just the minutes. So when I get to that, I will table that for future meetings. So we did anticipate that would happen. But fortunately, we have quite a few partners here today that work very, very closely with employers, and we'll be able to share on behalf of some of those stakeholders. So I'm still anticipating an engaging conversation. But I can affirm that the agenda and notice for this meeting was properly posted pursuant to Nevada's open meeting law, NRS 241.020. So again, agenda item number 3, the approval of minutes, will be tabled to September 12th. Moving to agenda item number 4, just a quick opening remarks. First of all, to say thank you. Reflecting on the first meeting for this council back in March, we're so grateful for the participation and the details that were shared and feedback that was given to partners. We know that between these two meetings, there's been quite a bit of engagement that's happened between employers and partners to help to fill some of the gaps and meet some of the urgent needs. So I really appreciate that engagement. So from that meeting, even though the details did vary slightly between industries, the overwhelmingly common thread was the urgent demand for talent. And I think all of you here, whether you do employ directly in the industry or support those that do, or support the workforce, that is not news to you. But we feel like it's important to reiterate that that was definitely heard here. So some adjustments have been made to the prompts, both on the employer introductions and on partner introductions, to work out a bit more detail on where those pain points are and potential solutions could be. And with that, we've also invited partners to address some of the opportunities to work with the populations that they serve that have been traditionally overlooked. So really looking forward to that. So you are welcome to use the chat to introduce yourself. I'm guessing there are many of you that have not met one another. So you are there, it's not required, but you are welcome to do that as if you had walked into a room and you were exchanging business cards with one another. You can share contact information, introduce yourself. You're also welcome to use the chat to pose questions to any of the presenters, and then we'll go through and make sure that we address those following presentations. But you'll also be welcome and prompted to raise hands and all of that good stuff. So moving on to agenda item number 5 is employer introductions. So we will start with direct employers, which I'm looking through and I don't see many, but if we have some, well, they will have the opportunity to speak first. Following that, we'll provide the space for partners that work closely with employers in this sector to introduce themselves and share on behalf of their stakeholders. We will have a space for partner introductions later in the agenda, so I do encourage you to please hold any resources, solutions, opportunities to engage as a partner for later in the agenda. And as we're really trying to keep this section pretty focused on what the demand is and what those challenges are. So you can go ahead, those of you that are employers in this industry, in logistics and distribution, if you want to go ahead and raise your hand and introduce yourself. And anticipating that there might not be many, go ahead. If you work with employers in this industry, you may raise your hand to get queued up. And then I'll call on you if that feature is not accessible. All right. So in the chat are prompts for the introduction. Once again, being able to share who you are and who you represent. And then what you're hearing from employers regarding top in-demand, hard to fill or urgent to fill roles. We're also interested in hearing acute challenges or barriers to attracting and retaining talent, being as specific as possible to help really drill into some of these details. And then any notable changes that have occurred during the past 3 months. And then given the theme of today's meeting, we're also interested to know if you can speak to any specific talent attraction resources or practices that seem to be working particularly well. And maybe those that you would like to see expanded or maybe supported a bit more. So I see Scott's hand raised, and I'll go ahead and open the floor to you first, Scott. Go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Scott Muehlerath, President and CEO at the Henderson Chamber of Commerce. And again, we're just under an 1,800 member organization with many members in the logistics and distribution sector. And I think I would make my comments around how fast the market is changing. And I think just going back to our last meeting and how overheated the market was in the sense of employers needing to pay more, significantly raise wages, and really have to reevaluate how they were recruiting, where they were recruiting, the types of benefits, certainly in logistics and distribution, but that went across the full spectrum from a chamber perspective. And now, well, I just find us in just a very, I don't know, historically unique position as an economy when there are so many adverse pressures on our economic positioning here in Southern Nevada, really across the entire country. How bad inflation has gotten since we last talked, but also the kind of an open acknowledgement and discussion around the potential recession that's on the horizon, and that the market is, things are tempering, things have leveled off, and things have started backsliding a little. Customer counts, in regards to brick and mortar retail, I know in some places are slipping. I don't know as much about the e-commerce space in that regards, but I do know a number of key retail outlets that do a lot of business here in Southern Nevada are seeing a softening of that by 8 to 20%, depending on the industry. And over the last 45 days, as far as customer counts, having been in the real estate and development industry for many, many years, and in the retail industry, I still put a fair amount of credence into customer counts as to a precursor to other economic trends. So I just find it an incredibly fluid and dynamic time, because there are still many very strong sectors of the economy, and many things are doing very well. But as the kind of challenging markers continue to pile on, anything from inflation to workforce shortages to supply chain to war in Ukraine to interest rates and on, it is it's kind of an avalanche of economic hurdles that maybe have never coexisted at one point as we have right now. So a long way, just a long way about of saying as we're planning our budget starting July 1, I find myself a lot more conservative in the economic outlook than I did even just 3 months ago. So I don't know if anyone else may have thoughts to add to that, but obviously that impacts kind of workforce and hiring expectations if larger employers are starting to get a little more conservative.
Absolutely. I appreciate that feedback. So when we were in the previous meeting, there was a lot of discussion about just not knowing where that ceiling is of the competition for the workforce was so tight. And especially in this industry, jumping between employers for a few cents or even following some of those bonuses around was pretty problematic on the demand side. Are you still in your region, Scott, seeing that to be the case, or what you're saying is that that's kind of completely stopped, or it's just slowed down? Do you have a sense?
Yeah, no, it hasn't completely stopped, and I don't know that it's slowed down much, but there has been a leveling off in some sectors, and some like healthcare, I mean, are just, you know, insane as far as the bonuses available and things like that. But even still, I mean, you're still seeing $17, $18, $19 in many retail environments, even for, you know, flipping burgers. But there is, I'm going to call it, I feel like we may have peaked, and I don't know how long we sit at that peak, but while we're at that peak, there's certainly intense competition still for employees.
Super helpful. Thank you. Is there anybody else that works closely with this industry that is interested in sharing their perspective? Go ahead, Nancy.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Nancy McCormick with EDON. And of course, we work with the logistics and distribution industry a lot, in addition to our other three main industries that we focus on. And to Scott's point, I think the condensing of all these jobs in the $17 to $22 an hour range is interesting because they're not as tiered as they used to be. So now, you know, someone competing for a worker in the service industry and food service and all that is competing with those people that are paying somewhere in that range for logistics and distribution, picker packer types of jobs. And then even at the upper end, competing for workers that are at the lower end of the manufacturing technician level. So in this one space of wages, there's all this competition that, you know, is trying to get these people to come to work. I think one of the things that we have found is the closer to the metro, the easier it is. And even if you're 20 miles north in the North Valleys of the Reno area, or you know, east out to the industrial center, or out at another somewhat remote business park, that those employers in particular are having a more difficult time, especially with the cost of gas, when there's so many other options that are available for them in the core of the, you know, Reno Sparks area. So there's just a lot of forces at work. We've heard a little bit on the recruiting roundtables that people are showing up a bit more to interviews and to work when they're offered jobs, and they're sticking around a bit. So a little bit of positive trending that they've been able to fill some positions, but absolutely fiercely competitive, and definitely causing employers to have to be extremely creative and to spend more marketing dollars toward talent attraction than just toward, you know, customer building. So the one interesting thing that's come out in the last few days is that Tesla says they're going to be laying off people, and those would be salaried workers. That you know, might be good news for some of the other businesses in town that are needing some skilled workers, you know, skilled talent, engineers or other types. We just don't know yet what kind of implication that may have for the region. but others are probably looking forward to perhaps having a little bit bigger pool of candidates to pull from in those areas. And, 10% is a pretty big number because they have a lot of employees out there at the Gigafactory.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're mentioning more going into the recruiting budgets or outreach, are you seeing potentially that this is still kind of a numbers game, that it's more about getting the word out and hoping to just attract more applicants? Or are you seeing companies pivot more toward the benefits they can offer, such as transportation or childcare, or is that not really happening in this industry?
Yeah, I would say a mix of wages, benefits, and I would add flexibility. So especially with the challenges that they know are facing the employees, like childcare, I've heard some conversations about ways that companies are just becoming a little bit more flexible for childcare emergency days added to their benefits plan, for instance, so they're not getting docked for their absenteeism if it has to do with a childcare issue. So I would say, promoting their cultures, being some are looking at additional or different sorts of benefits that may be more aligned with what their people are going through right now. And then, having to keep the wages competitive and just being creative about marketing. I mean, we have more billboards, more advertisements at the ballpark, more grassroots efforts to, get the attention of employees. So a little bit of everything. It's quite an expensive proposition for business to really consider something like offsetting the cost of childcare or incorporating childcare into their own facility. It's a pretty big ask, but I would say there are some that might be in a position to do that are just, at least looking into it, but no real commitments for big projects like workforce housing or things like that at this stage.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Who's next? George, I saw you reaching for the unmute button previously. Do you want to go ahead and share what's happening?
Sure. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I was going to mention that the general manager for the Do It Best warehouse in Mesquite is on our board of Mesquite Works, a nonprofit that is involved in workforce issues. We recently met with him and several other employers here in town, along with College of Southern Nevada's workforce people, trying to come up with what we could do to help with this process of trying to find folks to go to work. Gary Loosely is the general manager there. His comment was echoed by the other 3 or 4 employers we had, which was start by just finding me somebody who can go to work, who shows up, wants to work. He has trouble finding people who can pass a simple arithmetic test. I wouldn't even call it math. It's, if you receive an order for 12 dozen something or others, how many boxes is that,
Well, yeah.
So we're literally thinking about putting together a little arithmetic remedial sort of thing that people could work on. We subsequently held a job fair in May, on 13th of May, and we were very pleased that we had 105 people show up.
Wow.
We have not yet had an opportunity to call all of the employers who were there, where I think there were 26 employers, to find out now who's actually, how many people interviewed, how many people showed up, all the sorts of metrics that you'd want to know. We don't yet know how many people actually got hired on this, but it worked out pretty well. And we were really apprehensive because the Casablanca had had a job fair the week before and had 7 people show up.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this, again, just for those that aren't familiar with your program, so you're saying 105 people showed up to the job fair in Mesquite?
Yeah.
That's incredible. And just again, to clarify, so what you're seeing, the current trends for folks, your employers are still looking for warm bodies that can meet those basic work ready skills.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're working directly now with the Children's Cabinet and Wonder School to try to facilitate either an employer setting up childcare or perhaps a coalition of employers. There is not a suitable building in town to remodel. Interestingly, because of the way most of our construction is, it's slab on grade. The city recently acquired a church building. We traded a church for another building that the city had. And I'd hoped that we could make a daycare center out of that. It turns out to jackhammer through the foundation to put in all the little toilets and all the little water fountains and so on. It just was prohibitive.
Wow.
So we're going to have to build something. And we have an apartment complex here that's several hundred apartments, and they've just submitted plans to the city to add another 400 plus apartments to this complex. I've put a call in and spoken with the manager to ask her if she would speak with her owners about the possibility of adding a facility while they are doing all this construction, because they've got the perfect demographics.
Yeah, absolutely.
But and clearly daycare in Mesquite is a real issue.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. Really appreciate that. Okay. George Hempy, would you like to introduce yourself and share on behalf of the employers that you're working with?
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
my name is George
sorry,
Gall.
there's another George.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Hey, Amy, this is Deputy Director Williams. We were still interested in finding out who George Galt worked for as well. I don't think he identified that.
Okay, all right, quickly, George Galt, if you want to introduce who you're representing.
Sorry. I'm a city councilman in Mesquite. I'm also the chair of a nonprofit called Mesquite Works. That's been in existence since 2015, doing soft skills kinds of things, job fairs and so on. And we recently were the beneficiary of a gift from the Freest Trust of a shopping center, which we are now using to create a STEM program.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right, George Hempy, go ahead.
Hi, and I'm so sorry for the static that was being caused. I do not understand why that happened, but apologies to everyone. There's so many variables right now and wild cards out there. So I agree with what everyone has said so far. Nancy, Scott, George, appreciate everything that you all just shared. And I agree with all those areas. I think one of the things, obviously what we're hearing is across all industries, but with logistics as well, is finding talent. And the second really biggest thing, which we've already talked about, is retaining that talent. So for a lot of companies, one other challenge that is a big one is remote working. If you can do the remote working in the part of logistics industry you're in, that's great. But in some areas, you just can't. And so that's another issue. You're facing a lot of challenges with that. And some of the larger companies now, again, going back to the pay and wages, are offering more monies because they have to, and because their business model allows them to do that, okay, because of the capacity and the range. So you're seeing some individuals leaving the smaller groups for the larger ones because greater benefits, more pay. So I think looking at our business models is another thing that I'm seeing regionally and really across the globe is, how do I adjust that to fit today's environment? As hard as that may be, I mean, we're going to have to look at that because these competing industries and jobs where someone mentioned earlier, I think it was Nancy, that are paying, $21, $22, $23, $19. That's a reality. And people are going to move. People in that range are basically in survival mode. Let's all be honest, right? They're in survival mode and they're going to look at every dollar that they can get and other benefits. So I think looking at the business model, they mentioned childcare. That's another huge one. One of the things that businesses can do in childcare that I've seen and have experienced personally or implemented is, especially in your parks, your industry parks or innovation parks, when a group of employers come together and they set up within that same location, that same park, whether it be industry, innovation, however they're calling it, a central location for childcare. So they all participate in offering it. So that is a viable solution and something that can be very doable that addresses, in one area, so many issues of transportation and employees that have to, are worried about the childcare. It takes a lot. So if they come together, especially if you have a larger park, maybe you've got 30, 40, 50 or more employers there, then it becomes a lot more feasible in my mind. And then just finally, I think outreaching, like every other industry group out there, they're, well, not everyone, but many of them are dealing with the outreach, the marketing of their company as an industry as well as individually, right? So I think we have to look at how do we do that better so that people really understand. The classic examples like in manufacturing. You ask a lot of the younger people today, and they're just not aware of what manufacturing is today. So they think of my mom, my dad, or my grandparents. But when you tell them about the artificial intelligence and the robotics and the big data and the logistics that go with that, and you talk about the cloud, all these other things that they consider very, very attractive, and you say that's manufacturing today, they really gravitate much more to that. So I think identifying what you do, because a lot of people in logistics, they don't know that. Basically what that is the flow of goods or services, right? From point of origin to point of destination and everything that's involved in between.
Absolutely.
And that's a lot, right? So those are just some of my thoughts right now on what's going on. But the biggest ones, I think, again, are you have to revisit the area as far as the wage, that competition and looking at your own organization. Some of the studies that we've done, when you look at retention, so some of the organizations are having some success thankfully in hiring people, but then they leave. They'll leave in a month or 2 months or 3 months for that better wage package.
Mhm.
So in between that time period is when you really have the opportunity to push your brand, your culture. We really care about you. What you do in our organization means a lot, and we're going to show you that it means a lot. Because again, 70% of people leave because they don't like their boss,
Mhm.
right? I mean, that's just, that's a fact for whatever reason. So in a lot of the management areas, we obviously know we all have to train employees, but we do still need to train our managers and supervisors. So that's another area that it could be not as expensive, but could sure reap a lot of rewards. I remember I had an opportunity to teach management for 10 years at the college level, and you'd be surprised how little is offered in many groups. You get promoted and they just assume, well, you're going to know what you need.
Right.
So anyway, with that, I will be quiet. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. I really appreciate that perspective. And I see Nancy, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Oh, just real quick, the other issue that ties into this is the availability of people to provide childcare. and the
Mhm.
wages that those childcare providers make. And so even when you get a group, let's say at a business park to collaborate, that issue has to be addressed somewhere by, some of the partners, and there's some good work being done on it. George mentioned the Children's Cabinet, the Reno Housing Authority is another, and so there's work being done on that. But even if you solve the problem of the space, now you've got to solve the provider, then you've got to solve the problem of them being able to find the right people to work there too. So it's a three-tiered sort of effort.
Absolutely, very important. And those conversations, it's exciting to see what is happening across the state, but it's also very valuable just to continue to raise that point. Daniel, I see your hand.
Yes, hi, Amy. I'm Daniel Dong, and I'm with the Northern Nevada Business Solutions Office as a Business Solutions Account Manager, and really just wanted to make sure that the employers on this call understand that we do have premier recruiting services at our agency, and we offer those services at no cost to employers. And it's a number of different recruiting services that will certainly benefit them in finding additional candidates that they're looking for. Generally, what makes us different than posting your jobs, for instance, on Indeed, is when we post jobs through Employee NV, which is the state's Employee NV system. We have the state's largest database that our staff will look and find candidates that will match the job descriptions of employers when they're looking for candidates. And so we kind of take the algorithm part of it out of it and put the human touch portion in, so that we actually have someone that's looking for people to find and fill those positions.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. I will welcome you to share a bit more during the partner presentations, but since you have the floor, are you able to share anything on behalf of the employers that you work with, just trends and demand? Are you seeing more employers reaching out for those services? Or are you seeing any shifts in the last 3 months in particular?
Well, we're definitely seeing more employers that are looking for help. And so it's been keeping us busy, which is great. It's putting us in a position where we get the opportunity to find those candidates through recruiting methods. We offer other things, not just posting jobs. For instance, we have hiring events that we can do specifically for employers. So it's their own event. It's not a big part of a job fair. And we can help bring additional candidates in front of them for on-the-spot interviews and potentially on-the-spot hires. So it gets people in front of them right away. And we do provide labor market information for employers, so we can give them up-to-date trends on what wages are. I know there's been a lot of talk earlier about wages, and yes, those wages have increased, and they're at points now that, basically the employee or those seeking to become employees kind of control the floor right now. And in the current situation where we're at just 2.7% unemployment, we have to find these people somewhere, and we're able to do that through these different methods that we have and these different techniques that we have for recruiting.
Wonderful, thank you. And we will hear from David Schmidt and Chelsea Wahlberg in the next item. So I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing. Is there anybody else? Oh, actually, Gary, I'd love to hear from you in particular if you're seeing more demand with some of the employers that the Teamsters are working with, specifically around this logistics and distribution sector.
Thanks, Amy. Appreciate that. Real quick, it's pretty similar to last time we met when I've reported on stuff. So there's still some wage shopping going on. I don't think it's nearly as much that I've seen from previous months. I do have, reports out of, California, other, unions that there's another wave of wage increases going on over in California as well. So I don't know if that's going to come over the hills to us. So, but that's, essentially what I've seen so far in the trends. I know some of our, some of our core industries like a UPS, and in that range, where you can have a good career there with that employer. Those levels it takes to get to a full-time employment with them have drastically dropped. Usually within about a year or less, you can get on full-time with them, and you're going to make a substantial, middle-class wage with good benefits, and pension. So, in years past, I've seen it as high as 8 years over there before you get full-time. So now it's down to about a year or less. So.
Oh, that's incredible. It's still valuable to hear even quarter to quarter if things don't necessarily change significantly. That's valuable information too, but it's great feedback. Thank you.
Welcome.
All right, I'll give it a second. If there's anybody else that would like to share on behalf of employers that they work with, specifically on the demand in this logistics and distribution sector.
Amy,
Yes.
there's one more thing that we haven't talked about, and that is from the demand side. We've been talking about, supply side too, but employers set parameters for hiring, right? And every organization I've been a part of as well, we always had our parameters. And if we look and revisit those parameters, we may be able to open up a little more as far as the pipeline. So I'm talking about reentry, talking about people with disabilities, things like that, that may have normally been a barrier. If we revisit that, you may find that your pipeline will increase. I worked with one company where every one of the employees was legally blind. They did contracts with the military. They created clothing, rations, helmets, and the tolerances that they had for their helmets and their clothing and rations were better than people who could see. And everyone who worked in that organization, except for the CEO, was legally blind. But a lot of companies, they would say no, and especially with military contracts, we're not going to do that. And they had, believe it or not, they had about 300 employees at this one plant. And it was just amazing. So if we look at some of our parameters, I'm just saying that might broaden some of the pipelines that we currently have. And especially finally, the historically underutilized populations, that's one that if we revisit that area, and again, broaden some of the, maybe it's education requirements or whatever, that might be helpful too. Thank you.
Wonderful. Great segue to our presenters, but we have a few more items to address before then. But I think that's a good prompt too, in the meantime, to be thinking about some of those specific examples or specific questions that you anticipate on behalf of the employers that you work with, to be able to work with folks in some of these populations. So we will table that until that agenda item, but I'll go ahead and call on Cindy Kendall.
Hi, Amy. My name is Cindy Kendall. I'm the Business Solutions Supervisor at the Northern Nevada Business Solutions office. I did want to say, we actually just met with one of our partners, and they said where they're seeing the greatest growth of like 60% of the people they're helping get trained is for CDL drivers. Their challenges though are when they come out of training, a lot of these companies are looking for experienced drivers. So, maybe there's something we can meet in the middle where a more extensive training or something, because you have all these people that want to do this industry, but it's a challenge coming out of it.
That is tremendously helpful feedback, Cindy. I really appreciate you sharing that. I think that's exactly the type of specific information that will help us work with partners to be able to address some of those larger challenges that are likely happening in other programs too. But CDL we know is a big one. So thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else that is interested in sharing on the demand side? All right, so we'll move to agenda item number 6 and just say thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for being here. This is very, very important and very helpful. So agenda item number 6, we will focus on workforce and economic data. So I do encourage you to note any questions that are that occur during these presentations. You can put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand after the presentations. And we also want to know, again, what resonates or maybe differs from your experience. We heard quite a bit of that now, so I know that they'll speak to that while they present, but if there's anything else that occurs to you, as you know, if you have a specific example of something that really aligns with what you're seeing, or something that that might differ, that's valuable as well. So with that, I will recognize David Schmidt, Chief Economist with the Research and Analysis Division of the Nevada Department of Training, Employment, and Rehabilitation. I say it so you don't have to.
Thank you, Amy. I was just going to say, I'm what she just said, Chief Economist for the Research and Analysis Bureau, and my contact information is available in the chat if you have anything you want to reach out to directly afterward. I'm going to try to do this quickly. Oops, except it shared on the screen I didn't want it to. So give me a moment to try to fix my PowerPoint, and I'll just go through it the slightly clunkier way. So I'll just have my presentation up here, and hopefully everyone will be able to see it. My goal here is to talk about what are the current conditions as best I can, without focusing too much on things that haven't changed an awful lot. And so I wanted to highlight just what our current employment situation is, and a few of the data products we've been looking at most recently. As of April of 2022, which is our most recent data, the private sector in Nevada actually now employs more people than it did prior to the pandemic. We're up 2,400 jobs compared to our February 2020 peak. We haven't quite yet recovered on our total jobs number. In part, this is due to government employment, which is lagging behind the private sector. Government is down 6,500 jobs. Total is down 4,100 jobs. We still have a lot of dislocation as far as total number of jobs in the casino industry, which is down, accommodation is down about 30,000 jobs in the state compared to its pre-pandemic peak. Taking a look at what that employment data says about the transportation, warehousing, and utilities sector in particular in both Las Vegas and Reno, you can see that while there was a blip in the COVID-19 pandemic, we have moved well beyond that in both Reno and Las Vegas. So this is a sector of the economy that is really performing strongly. You can see that on this chart here. You have green and red. Green showing where how much have we recovered, the size of the boxes showing the overall size of the industry. And this bright green space here is the transportation, warehousing, and utilities industry, which is up over 20% compared to what its pre-recession peak was. I think
David,
it's a lot. Yes.
Sorry, I just, you're still sharing the PowerPoint slide, which is okay, except that,
Yes.
that last one, I think it's helpful to see. It's just hard to read the subcategories.
Yeah, so some of the details here are smaller, and really, if you want to see this in particular, like if you're trying to read this box down here, that's educational services, and it's essentially impossible to read. But really the big piece here is that transportation, warehousing, and utilities is up 21%. It's 6% of our total employment. Accommodation industry is sitting at 80% of what we were prior to the pandemic, and so those are the two biggest outliers. In general in the state, most industries are showing 100% or more of what they were at prior to the pandemic, with the exception of accommodation, government, and other services, which are and the information industry, which is pretty small. Taking a look at something that I think a lot of people touched on is the overall demand for work. This takes a couple of different data sources and combines it together. In blue, we have our total employment number. And in red, we have the data from the job openings and labor turnover survey. So this is only through March. It's a little bit old right now, but you can see that if you think about openings plus total employment as things that you can add together, then by that measure, essentially we're at the highest demand we've ever had for workers in the state. That is higher than before the pandemic, but that mix is changing. We have that growing share of job openings that has been really, really prevalent nationally, where we have everyone everywhere looking for workers, and that's true in Nevada too. With our employment level very close to being fully recovered, a lot of that growth is in the attempt to expand our total employment base compared to what we were prior to the pandemic. Looking at national data, this looks at the total number of hires and the total number of quits and how that's changed over the past year. You can see here, this is the transportation and utilities sort of sector. You can see retail trade is pretty high in terms of both the number of quits as well as the number of hires. Quits are on the vertical axis, hires are on the horizontal axis. And so if a number is moving up and to the right, it means that there's increasing level of quits and an increasing level of hires. For the transportation, warehousing, and utility sector as a whole, which is a little bit more narrowly focused on the logistics side of thing, excluding retail and wholesale trade, we've actually seen over the last year that nationally, the level of quits in this industry has fallen while the number of hires has risen. This is generally good news for employers. This red line represents 2 quits for every hire. This black line is 1 quit for every hire. This is national data. Unfortunately, we don't have this at the state level. Looking at job openings, you can see that in all of these areas, there has definitely been growth in the total number of job openings. Here, this red line is where you would have 2 job openings for every hire during the month. So none of these industries are quite at that level. If I were showing you healthcare, it would be off the charts up above this red line because there's a large number of job openings in that industry. Broadly, a lot of industries are kind of in this middle range where they're not quite 2 openings for every hire. But you can see in the last year for transportation, warehousing, and utilities, both the number of job openings and the pace of hires have been rising. And so we have that increasing demand for work. This makes sense because it's an industry that employs 20% more people than it did prior to the pandemic. For the total churn we see in Nevada, again, for March of 2022, I think it's interesting to look at the national rank here, where the total rate of hires, job openings, layoffs is closer to the middle of what we see in the nation as a whole. Our national rank for hires is about in the middle, job openings is about in the middle. This doesn't necessarily mean that it's low. If you look at the rate here and the highest rate that we've ever experienced going back to the early 2000s, you can see we're at 7.3% job opening rate. That's down from a peak of 10.6%, but it's still pretty high. And it's about in the high range of what we've seen over the last year. And so it is this persistent looking for workers. This is really just sort of describing what I think everybody already knows. But knowing that this is a national, it's not just here, this is a big, everyone is looking for the same things in the same ways. And so that might inform where we might find potential ideas and solutions. Thinking about rates of pay, I know that this is something that's often hard to measure. We can look a little bit at the sector level and see what's happening. We can't drill this down very tightly, but we can see how Nevada ranks compared to the nation as a whole, again, in how rates of pay and what people are making are changing. And so if you think of your weekly earnings, you have 2 components to that. There's how many hours are you working in a week and how much pay are you earning for those hours of work. And so the next 3 charts kind of break that out. So for total weekly earnings for trade, transportation, and utilities, Nevada is a little bit below average in terms of total weekly pay that people are receiving. And we have been seeing slightly faster than average pace of increase, but you can see that there's a pretty wide range of experience here from Oregon and North Dakota that are up over 10%. Nevada is sitting at 6.1%, ranked 17th out of the states. If we look at the total number of hours being worked in this sector, there's not a whole lot of difference amongst the states from the high to the low. It's all in this 30 to 35-ish kind of range. Nevada is above average here. We're number 6 in the country in terms of the total hours people are working, and that is increasing. Where most states, as the earnings are going up, the hours have shrunk a little bit. But in Nevada, we are in fact working longer, and we're number 10 in the nation as far as the rate of increase in the number of hours people are working. And if we look at the total rate of pay, Nevada's average hourly wage is below average. We're a little bit below $25 an hour across all employees within this industry. That's 41st out of 51 states. We are seeing some gains at about an average pace of 5.4% in average hourly earnings. This is one of the smaller rates of change that we see if we look at other industries in the state. Leisure and hospitality sector is up almost 15% in this same measure. And so the average hourly change in some of these industries is really, really fast, and that pulls up a lot of the numbers for the state as a whole. For this particular sector, the observed change that we have in that hourly rate of pay isn't quite as fast. 5% is still a lot over the year. It's definitely a lot more than if we think back to a couple of years ago when we have, 1 to 2% inflation. A 5% gain is not insignificant, but it's kind of average for what we're seeing in a lot of places. There's very few states that have actually seen a decline in that average hourly rate of pay. Touching on a couple of other points for Nevada, we're looking at, or we've been looking at other ways of measuring unemployment. This takes a look at people who are unemployed, have been unemployed for 15 or more weeks as a share of the total employment we see in the state. So how much of our unemployment is longer term versus shorter term? And it's kind of interesting that in Nevada, the gray area here represents the 20th to 80th percentile of other states, with the dashed line being the middle state. We have a significantly higher share of our total unemployment in this longer term category. This is a 12-month average, so it's a little bit older and still has some of those post-pandemic effects. We are seeing some declines, but if Nevada was at the national average here, the impact on our unemployment would also be that right now Nevada's unemployment is 5%, the national average is 3.6%, and the difference here is about 1.5 points. And so where Nevada does have somewhat higher unemployment, it's in this longer term category, people who have been unemployed and looking for work for more than 4 months. And so there is still that sort of disconnect where there are some potentially available workers. We do have somewhat higher unemployment, particularly in Southern Nevada. And particularly, like if we were to focus on an area, North Las Vegas is the area where there is the highest unemployment in the state. North Las Vegas, then Las Vegas. The further you move out from sort of the core of the Las Vegas area, the lower it gets. By the time you get to Mesquite, unemployment rates are actually pretty comparable to what they are in Nye County, Lyon County, Carson City areas. Not quite as low as we have in Northeast Nevada, where you're pushing 2% unemployment. But the impact of this longer term unemployment and how we can try to connect this population with work is probably, I think, a piece of the puzzle worth thinking about. And then sort of finally, I want to talk about a little bit about labor force participation. Again, this is looking at the range of other states and how Nevada has changed over time. And it's interesting to see that Nevada is much lower in participation than we used to be. And the big question here is why? What's driving this? What's causing it? Even as we were going through the boom and the recovery from the Great Recession, we see this declining labor force participation rate. And so this is pretty new, and there aren't an awful lot of conclusions to pull out of it yet. And there is a pile of information in this chart that's nearly impossible to read, but I'm glad Amy sent out the copy of the chart. And if anyone needs a copy, email me and I'll send you the presentation too. But this looks at from 2015 to 2019 in 1 year average increments for Washoe County and Clark County, because those are the only areas large enough to give me that 1 year data. What is the labor force participation rate in each of those counties, and how does that compare to the average experience in other states? And so again, that gray area is kind of the average experience for states. Pretty consistently, we can see the participation rate in Clark County or in Washoe County is generally at or above the national average. This isn't always true, but it's pretty broadly true. And I think it's interesting as you look through the age categories here, which is this first basically 2 rows of the chart. Particularly in the Clark County area, as we get into workers who are 55 to 59, 60 to 64, 65 to 74, and then 75 plus, the rate of participation is starts to move lower. When we're in these higher categories, there's a lot of places like 20 to 24, 30 to 34, 35 to 44, where the experience in Clark County is closer to the average state. But as we move into this older population, I think we're seeing a little bit of that sort of Sunbelt impact, whereas the population that we have in Clark County is probably a little bit more likely to be retired, especially among the older population, and not necessarily looking for work. And so labor force participation is the share of the population that's either working or looking for work. But it could represent an opportunity as we're thinking about the shortage or the difficulty finding workers. What are the ways that we could try to attract people into the workforce? And so if you look at the population who has any disability, the national average for participation is below 50%. And that's true for Clark and Washoe counties as well. And so I 150% echo George's, like, how can we find those less likely to be participating, those possibly overlooked groups, and find ways to help connect them with employment opportunities. I think this is a huge potential opportunity there. Thinking about childcare needs, the participation rates that we see for females with children, either under 18, preschool age, school age. In Clark County, you can see we're basically trending at or below whatever the 20th percentile state is in each of these categories. And so we have generally low levels of participation compared to other states, especially in Clark County and in these areas. And finally, to wrap up, just say what hasn't changed much so that I could try to be at least a little bit shorter in my time talking. The unemployment rate in Nevada has been pretty stable over the last several months. It's about 5%. There's not much to see here. Unemployment claims are at multi-decade lows. That hasn't really changed. But it's been pretty stable. We haven't continued to see those numbers decline. They've largely leveled off. And then here's a link to our website, email address to contact us, some other workforce and UI system resources, and I will happily hand it over to Chelsea.
All right, thank you, Dave. I am Chelsea Wahlberg. I am the research manager over at GoEd. So today I've got a little bit of a different presentation for you than I shared last time. What I'm going to be going over today more has to do with our in-demand occupation analysis and the next form of that, which really involves all of you. So I'm hoping I can get some good participation in what I'm going to ask. Because please know that your input is going to be really valued and it's going to be incorporated into the next iteration. So I'll get to that, but first, let me go over the components that currently go into our in-demand occupation analysis. This is just an overview. Please don't be intimidated by all of the slides. It's going to detail each of these pieces. I'm not going to talk about them in length. I just wanted you all to have these paragraphs available for reference. But if you have questions about any of these portions, I'd be happy to go more in detail. So starting with our target sector approach, the in-demand occupations are really meant to focus around GoEd's target industries and where we are trying to drive our economy. So what we do is we do staffing patterns on the culmination of each of our industries, and then use that as our base for employment rather than just use total employment for each occupation. So STEM scores is another really important component. Unfortunately, this is starting to get really old. It's almost 10 years old, but Brookings developed this system in 2013. It's a comprehensive scoring system to determine the level of STEM knowledge needed to be employed in each occupation. That's essentially the meat of what that is. So when we do our ranking, STEM scores that are higher are ranked higher. So if you need STEM, you're going to move up in our list. Location quotients, I think a lot of people are pretty aware of at this point, but just to quickly overview, that will quantify how concentrated a particular industry, or in this case, occupation is within a region as compared to the state, county, or the nation, whatever contains that smaller region. In our case, we are comparing everything to the nation. So it reveals what makes a certain occupation unique to that industry or to that state or county, as it were. There's a little example here for you, or not an example, rather. Excuse me. There is something a little bit different with what we do with our location quotients, though. If an occupation has 200 employees or less, the location quotient for all people employed in the occupation, not just within our staffing patterns, also known as the economy location quotient, will be used instead, just to normalize the data. We don't want an occupation to get lost just because it's not part of what we've deemed important. So we will use the larger location quotient in that case. We use our job postings data. This comes from MC. Job postings, if you all don't know, these MC and Burning Glass, which have become one at this point, but any of those job postings collections agencies, what they do is they scrape the web. They pull all of the job postings that they can find from popular websites, and then they will deduplicate them so that those ads are not repeated. They're really timely. They can be a little bit wonky, but they're the only real-time data that we can have access to assess demand for an occupation. So in the case of the jobs posting data I used for this was May 2020 to April 2021. That was the most recent at the time. I will be updating with the most recent year's worth of data once I update them for this round, of course. Looking at wages, pretty self-explanatory, but these are derived from the Occupational Employment Statistics Program. We use average wages. There's lots available with the OES program. They give the 10th, the 25th, median, 75th, and I think 90th percentiles. But we use the average wage just to try to capture all of that. And in the case that a wage was suppressed, meaning there just wasn't enough data for them to supply that information, we use the national wage for that occupation. Employment projections, this also comes from MC. I'm not going to really explain how they do their projections, but in case you're curious, this slide does detail where they get their information and how they update those projections. The occupation projections are based off of industry projections. So that comes from the National Industry Occupation Employment Matrix, and the rest of this information from BLS is all available publicly if you were curious to see the inputs of those projections. But of course, how an occupation is growing is very important for an in-demand list, so we incorporate that as well. The automation index is something new that I added this last round. That just tells us which occupations are high risk for automation and which are low risk for automation. We want to make sure if we're saying an occupation is a smart one to go for, that it's not going to automate out in a couple of years. And then the last piece of this for this round was the COVID susceptibility index. I developed that in-house based on job loss, unemployment insurance claims, and change in wage from the peak of the pandemic until what was most currently available at that time for each occupation. And then I ranked it much like the automation index was structured. So any occupation that ranked greater than 100 indicated a higher than average risk of COVID affecting the occupation negatively, and less than 100 was a lower than average risk. I don't think I'll be including that this round. I think the economy has largely adjusted as much as it will be to what happened with COVID. So I'm going to cut that out this next round. But I still think it's important to know that it was included this round. And then finally, how we create our ranking. So once we get all of those factors compiled for every occupation, each factor is weighted. Those weights are determined by expert opinion and regression analysis to derive what's most logical and what creates an optimal score for the occupations. And those weights do shift a little bit when we get into our county groupings, depending on the area. Some things are more important in Southern Nevada than they are in the rural counties, for example. And then once each occupation has a weighted score, they're then ranked to provide the detailed in-demand occupation ranking list. I then have to do some separate finagling to get to the 3-digit or the 4-digit and the 2-digit NAICS lists. But we do compile those as well, so you can see the broader groups of industries and how they ranked. Sorry. Okay, so this is just to show you the 2-digit SOC codes. I think I kept saying industry codes. I apologize. These are occupational groupings. But these are the least detailed, the broadest groups and how they ranked. Healthcare came in number 1, followed by installation, maintenance, and repair occupations, and then production occupations. Production occupations are going to contain the vast majority of things that are important to manufacturing and things like that. What's probably really important for your group is transportation and material moving occupations, which ranked 9th. But this gives you kind of a broad idea of how those detailed occupations might have shaked out. So here's what I will be asking from the sector councils, and I really, really do beg you to help, because I think some quality input from people who work in these industries would be really, really important moving forward, so we can make sure that the lists are making sense. So there are 62 occupations in the transportation, distribution, and logistics career cluster. So what I'm going to ask, I provided a list to Amy, and hopefully she'll be able to send that out after. But I would be really grateful if you could rank from 1 to 62 for each of those occupations, what you find most important. I did include how they landed in our high demand list. You absolutely don't have to agree with it. You can think the least important in my list is the most important for you, and you can rank that number 1, that's fine. But I will be using that data as some form of adjustment and average them out between all of the responses I get and incorporate that going forward. So here's just a little example. You can see logisticians ranked 19th in my list. There are 700 something odd occupations. So I'm not going to ask you to line up with the ranks that were given. So please just 1 through 62. But I just did a random number generator. This is not influenced by absolutely anything that I think. But so let's say you think out of those 62 occupations, logisticians rank 10th for you. That's what you would put in that row. Like I said, completely random. I don't have an opinion on how important these are for you all, but that would be most helpful. So that concludes my presentation for today. Please let me know if you have any questions about how we get these rankings, or even if you have suggestions, things that you think would be helpful to include in the future. Really anything. I'm happy to hear criticisms or critiques or suggestions. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. I don't see any questions in the chat yet or raised hands, but just 1 second. I just want to just add to this that this list is used by partners across the state. Agencies will use it in grant applications to demonstrate what jobs are in high demand in Nevada and beyond. So I do encourage you to engage with this process. And I have a quick question for Chelsea before we ask for others. So are you looking, this group is primarily today folks that work with employers. Are you, is it most helpful for them to distribute to their logistics and distribution networks and ask them to engage? And would it
Yes.
also
Yes.
be helpful for them, barring maybe that direct participation, would it be helpful for them to provide their analysis just based on the feedback that they're getting?
Sure. Yeah. And if you don't end up ranking the full list, that's fine too. If you just want to pick out like your top 15 and rank those, if it's just too much to look at, that's fine. Like I will take any information I can get. You can almost think of it as like a little survey. I do think the most important data will come from people who are actually working in the field. But for the partners that work with these employers daily and they know this information, they know what employers are seeking, and they know out of this occupations list what is most important, I definitely think that information is still valued and helpful.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I saw Lisa's hand first. Lisa, did you have a question or comment?
I just was gonna say, I don't know many folks who could hold 62 pieces of data in their head. I was gonna say, would the top 10 and maybe, any that are just absolutely not of use, but looking at some of those like, boating vessels, like I'm gonna guess that's not real high in Nevada, although there might be a few very specific folks in this space who use that. So I would guess that the most valuable information would be the top 10 or 15, as you say, and maybe I really don't care about any of these, and that will give you a good listing.
That would be absolutely fine. I really will take any information anyone's willing to give me.
So if your contact information is in the chat, I will make sure to include you in a distribution following this meeting. I'll also post it on that sector council meeting page with that request following the meeting. Thank you. George, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Chelsea and David, for the excellent reporting. I did have a question though, and not so much for this meeting, but maybe for the next one, when you start getting some impact, the feedback from the employers, is what your general impression is based on that data on the in-demand occupation rankings. You're getting a lot of data. You presented a lot of data for us to assimilate, right? But if you could give us like what your impressions are to what does that mean in a format that, like, let's say we're talking about logistics now, right? And how does the supply chain issues of today, based on the data that you've received, how could that affect our supply chain issues, or what should we be thinking about in our supply chain issues relative to the data? And not for this time, but for the next meeting. And I think that would be very helpful. Did that make sense, Chelsea and David?
It did. And I will, in the very least, summarize the data that I get back from you all, but I can absolutely look into how the occupations you're missing and what you need most is impacting your supply chain.
Right. Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. That was my question.
Absolutely.
Thank you. George Galt, go ahead.
I serve on the board of the Las Vegas Global Economic Alliance, and they just last week released their current document called Workforce Blueprint. And I'm looking at the demand occupations, which are very different than the list that we've just been discussing. In fact, logistics is number 30 in their configuration.
So their list is based off of the work that we do, but they hire a third party to do things a little bit differently, how they want to do it. And of course, theirs is more focused on Las Vegas, which I do have a Southern list if you're interested in seeing that.
I would
but before, like honestly, kind of recently, I went through and redid how those larger groups are calculated, because we were just kind of doing a straight across sum and it wasn't making sense. And it's really difficult for me to explain why. But I think the groupings now are more accurate than ever when we're looking at those higher up groups. This detailed industries, that methodology hasn't changed at all. But I'm sorry, you probably have a bigger question than what I'm explaining, but know that the lists are related. It's just they do change things how they see fit. So I can't speak too much to the changes they make, but
I raised the issue simply because it's interesting to me. I think certainly this list seems to be appropriate for what we see here in Southern Nevada. I don't know that we even need to try to think of a standard list across the whole state. I don't think that would be particularly relevant, but it is interesting to me that the governor's office has one list and Southern Nevada has another list.
yeah, well, we do have those separate. So we have Southern, Northern Nevada, Northeastern Nevada, and Central Nevada lists.
Right.
So those do differ, especially those Central and Northeastern Nevada lists. Those are very, very different from the Northern and Southern lists, which are a little bit closer and definitely closer to the statewide list.
Yeah, and I am, for those of you who haven't been along I-15 in North Las Vegas recently, it's lined with warehouses and logistics businesses. And certainly I'm a little surprised, frankly, that logistics would score number 30 in that list, given that the emerging sector.
Yeah, I don't personally agree that that is correct. So
fair enough.
Yeah, thank you, George. Yes, George Hempy.
Yeah, I think to be fair, if you look at what George, what you just referred to, and I understand exactly where you're coming from, but if you look at the target industry trends, the top 7 for our region, number 4 is transportation and logistics technologies. Not that it's ranked 4, but there's 7. There's general advanced manufacturing, and then there's 1, 2, 3, 6 more after that. So they actually have transportation and logistics, in there as one of the major technologies. So I don't know if it's fair to say that it's 30, in our region, because it is one of the major ones. I don't know. What's your thoughts on that, George and Chelsea?
Well, I think I've been working with Crown Cork and Seal that's in the process of building 375,000 square feet.
Right.
The information that we received initially was that there would be something like 40 deliveries a day. So we're suddenly, Mesquite is going to have some logistics in addition to the Do It Best warehouse. And of course, it's too early to factor that in. But certainly, gosh, there's an article in the Review Journal this morning about the Amazon warehouses changing hands repeatedly. So that whole North Las Vegas corridor now is a real factor in that. And I'm not sure that our list really covers that.
And the other thing that I think that's really those are great points. The other thing I think for us to keep in mind that logistics not only as an industry, but as a technology, logistics and the data analysis, it's one of the top 4 drivers in the world today. So we have logistics itself, that industry and everything, but then the data and how it works with it, that is a huge driver for all the other industry groups. But I appreciate, the presentations everyone's given, all the thoughts. I've learned several things today, so thank you so much.
Well, both Georges, I really, really appreciate your input on this, and the fact that you disagree with some of the things in either list is, in my mind, actually okay. I want to know that. And I really do want your input, because I do think that the anecdotes are missing from data, obviously, and I would like to quantify what you are seeing. So if you look at that list and you say none of this makes sense, that's actually totally fine. I would like to fix that.
Yeah, what George and George are adding us is just the local wisdom. That's what we're talking about.
That's what we need.
Our local regional wisdom, because that always tempers whatever's coming out from a state perspective or a national perspective. And so, and of course, George has tons more local wisdom than me. It's been around here a lot longer, but that's all we're talking about, is just adding local wisdom to what you've already shared. Thank you.
Absolutely. So thank you all. Are there any additional questions? I want to make sure we have some time for our guest partners to present, and then also for others to introduce themselves and their programs. So, but this is absolutely valuable, and I'm excited to see what feedback Chelsea receives. But any other quick questions on the data that was presented, or on the feedback that's requested on the high demand occupations list before we move on?
This is Elisa. The one thing I would add to that is, at least I know the conversation in Northern Nevada about logistics and these kinds of industries is they take up a lot of space, but they don't necessarily have a lot of employees. So I don't know if there's a way to capture that in the growth curve information as well, because it's a little different than some of the other industries that way. But I know that's been a long going conversation up north.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. I really appreciate your input in this too.
Okay, so I'm going to move us on to agenda item number 7. Just to say quickly that both David and Chelsea are available to answer questions that come up as you look through the slides that were assembled, or the information. They are a extremely valuable wealth of information. So I encourage you to reach out if any questions do come to mind. So agenda item number 7 are partner presentations, again, which has already been echoed in earlier comments and introductions from those of you speaking to the employer demand, that being able to reach populations that maybe have been traditionally overlooked is incredibly important. And so we've assembled 3 presenters here today. And so we're scheduled to go until 1 o'clock. I understand if you need to leave early, but this is recorded. It will be posted probably this afternoon. And then again, I encourage you to reach out to those partners directly. But we would like to open the floor to those folks, and then be able to engage in some conversation or questions between each presentation. So please be prepared for that. So first I will recognize Gracia Perez Rodriguez, of Skilled Immigrant Program Officer with the Nevada Governor's Office of New Americans. Oh, I can't hear you. Your audio is not coming through.
That works better?
Yep, there you go.
Okay, perfect. I'm sorry. I'm always messing with the Microsoft. Thank you, Amy, for the invitation. Thank you, everyone, for your time. As you mentioned, my name is Gracia Perez. I'm the Skilled Immigrant Integration Program Officer here at the Governor's Office for New Americans. The Governor's Office for New Americans is fairly new. It was created in 2019, but pandemic years don't count, so we are running on just a few months here. My role here is fairly new. I'm new to the office. I've been here for 2 months. As my title mentions, I am the officer in charge of the Immigrant Integration Program. So what we want to do here is we want to break the silos between the agencies that are currently working for workforce development. We want to bring our immigrants to the front and let everyone know that here they are ready to work. Most of our immigrants that come here to Nevada and to the United States come with a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience. A lot of them come with university degrees or certifications. So there's a lot of brain waste in our state. We have doctors, engineers, nurses that are working in McDonald's, they're working, driving an Uber, which is not wrong. It pays the bills, right? But what we need is we need to utilize those talents, and we need to put them into work. So that's what we are trying to do here. We have formed 2 groups, one in the north, one in the south. It's our Immigrant Workforce Development Group. And what we are trying to achieve is a strategy so that we could get our immigrants help them overcome the barriers, because the barriers that they have are completely different from other populations here. So help them overcome those barriers and get them to work and give them the ability to not only work, but grow. So we want to create opportunities for them to utilize those talents and those knowledge that they already have, so that we can take advantage of that as a state, and that we could help them also achieve their personal goals, right? So I want to share with you my idea of how this would work, how this would look. Just give me 1 second, because I'm always yes. So we have these are the barriers that our immigrants face. As you may see, a lot of them look like the barriers that most people are facing right now coming out of the pandemic. But we have others that not every population has, like limited English proficiency, low digital literacy, lack of recognition for foreign credentials. We have the housing problem, the childcare, the transportation, as you guys were mentioning. We have specific education and training needs. And well, those training and those English classes, the digital literacy, they cost money. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to work with our state partners, our local partners, to use the programs that are already in place, take advantage of those, and kind of, integrate them for to overcome the barriers that our immigrants are having. The reason that I'm here, thank you, Amy, for the invitation again, is that we want to include our employers. We want them to invest in our immigrants. 1 in every 5 Nevadans is an immigrant. So there's a lot of people. I could tell you, as an immigrant myself and a skilled immigrant, when you come here, you only come here and you want to work, but you need the right opportunities and the right programs and the right tools to be able to succeed. So our plan would look something like this. And what we want to do is we want to get our refugees, immigrants, help them with their English, with their digital skills, get them jobs, entry-level jobs, so that they can start earning money. But at the same time, we want to work with the employers so that we could get training, certificates, apprenticeships, so that they can grow into a full-time skilled employment. That way, we will be taking advantage of their talents. They would be taking advantage of their own talent, and we would have a better way to fill out all those jobs that you guys are talking about. That's my presentation for the moment. I'll keep it short because I know we're short of time. I'm going to put my information in the chat. If you want to talk with me one-on-one, I would greatly appreciate it. I basically want to get it everywhere I can so that we get our immigrants up front and working. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Gracia. So for those that are interested in connecting with this workforce, do they reach out through the typical channels, through the DETR offices or the business services team, or is there a special mechanism for them to reach these populations? Or I guess I have a follow-up to even understand what is available in that workforce. So the numbers of folks, the skills that they might be coming with, or anticipating more immigrants in the pipeline, things like that. Is that through your office or DETR? That's a big question. Sorry.
It will be through our community partners. The plan that we're working on, we are building it. As I mentioned, we've been here for only 2 months. Well, at least I've been here for only 2 months. So what we are doing is, what we want to do, we want to start with our refugees. We are still learning how our immigrant refugee population looks like. What we want to do is want to be able to create a pipeline. Obviously, it's gonna it's going to take time to be able to duplicate or repeat this in every single sector. We haven't started with the sector, or we haven't chosen a sector here in the South, but we will. We want to do this, or we want to have clarity by the end of the year so that we could start working that. But yeah, definitely all of our immigrants, refugees will have to come through our state offices or our refugee resettlement offices. That's how it would work. If I know it's a little time and it's a lot of information, but yeah, definitely if you want to reach out, send me an email. I'll put my information there. We could talk more about it. And I can invite you guys, if you're interested, to our workforce development group. That way you could get to hear what's happening out there, what's going on with the immigrant workforce. So yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. And I see Cindy's hand raised as well. Cindy, do you have a question? Oh, yeah. Do you have a question, Cindy?
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. We've actually been working with the Afghan refugees in Northern Nevada since the end of last year. We've placed, we're working currently with about we've worked with about 70 of them. 52 have been placed. We found a lot of employers, if they had one person that spoke English, we were able to get them jobs in manufacturing, different restaurants, because they had a translator and they had somebody that they can go in as a group. And as long as they had that one translator, it was successful. So, and we are actually, John Perel's partnered with Grecia, and we're very excited to working with her.
Wonderful. Nancy, go ahead.
I was just going to add that I have talked with at least one employer who brought in a number of refugees from Afghanistan, and it worked out very nicely because they also already had some other individuals working for them that spoke Farsi, and it was a common language that they could communicate in for this cluster of people. And they also, as an employer, helped with some of the other needs that these folks had. And so it's, you know, it's working out for them to have additional workers who are very hard workers that are able to keep his business afloat, basically.
Absolutely, that's spectacular. Thank you for that feedback. Any other questions right now? I know that Grecia will put her information in the chat, but any other questions in particular? Okay. So we will now recognize Deputy Director Charles Daniel. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. No, Brian Williams. Sorry about that. With the Nevada Department of Corrections.
Don't worry. Thank you. And hello, everyone. I'm going to condense my presentation a little bit. And Amy, I'll send you a copy of everything. That way it gives a better understanding on what DLC offers. And I first want to give an introduction as far as our reentry programs, which consists of vocational education, substance abuse, mental health, our classification department, our chaplain service, and a list of other departments that fall under the reentry program and model. But the reentry program is specific programming backed with comprehensive case management. The Nevada Department of Corrections philosophy is that in order to systemically reduce crime and enhance public safety, a seamless plan of services and supervision must be developed for each offender and delivered through the collaboration of involved state, local organizations, and authorities. This collaboration begins at intake and continues throughout incarceration during the offender's transition into the community, as well as aftercare. The program's mission statement, I wanted to share this with you guys, I feel is so important. The State of Nevada Department of Corrections Program Division is committed to utilizing evidence-based policies and practices that are gender responsive and culturally competent to ensure the safety of all Nevadans by holding offenders in custody accountable for their actions and simultaneously revolutionizing best practices for reintegration into society. While in custody, offenders will receive evidence-based programs which are innovative and challenge their mindset for preparation back into the community. These effective and efficient programs will reduce the economic and social impact of mass incarceration while providing opportunities for offenders in custody to become productive members of society. We are committed to working in partnership with local law enforcement agencies, legislators, courts, businesses, and advocacy groups for offenders in custody in a collaborative effort to enhance community trust, promote safety, and unify our communities while reducing recidivism. NDOC's objective is to remove or reduce barriers for successful reentry so that releasing offenders who have served their time and paid their debt to society are able to secure employment, obtain stable housing, support their children and their families, and contribute to their communities. In order to accomplish this, NDOC staff will begin the reentry process once an offender enters our department. Offenders will be assessed in the following areas: medical evaluations, mental health evaluations, educational evaluations, security threat group, which is gangs, and case management. As you'll see, successful reentry programs for offenders rely on more than just helping ex-offenders find jobs. It also requires helping offenders change their attitudes and beliefs about crime, addressing mental health issues, providing mentoring, offering educational opportunities and job training, and connecting them with community resources. At this time, I would like to introduce you guys to Michael Russell, who's over our wraparound services department within reentry. Mike, if you could just speak real quick.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Russell. I'm a program officer with the Department of Corrections. I do workforce development, and I also do evidence-based programming. Our reentry provides evidence-based programming throughout classroom settings, delivery of a couple programs. They're called Getting It Right, MRT, which is moral recognition therapy, good intentions, bad intentions, and thinking for a change. These classes are base testing of the NRAS, which is the Nevada Risk Assessment Tool. This is administered to all offenders to determine the risk of reoffending. These classes are offered to our medium and high risk offenders that are more likely to reoffend. To give you guys just a quick snapshot of what each program offers, Getting It Right basically is gives current best practices for putting the offenders back into the communities with basic life skills. We have MRT, which is the moral recognition therapy, is a cognitive behavioral treatment system. Basically, it's a behavior modification so we can modify the behaviors of the offenders. Good intentions, bad intentions, of course, is focused on relapse and recidivism prevention for the addict or offenders going into our system. And then Thinking for a Change is a cognitive behavior change program also as well with our offenders. In order to accomplish what NDOC's mission is, we offer a variety of evidence-based programming and vocational programs offered through community partners. The community partners we're talking about are like CCSD, Community College, Hope for Prisoners, FIT, DEETR, Workforce Connections. Some of the classes that we offer are Automotive Service Excellence, Computer Navigation, Cosmetology, Culinary Arts, HVAC Services, Entrepreneurship, Heavy Equipment Operators, Hospitality and Tourism, Multi-Craft Core Curriculum, which is the MC3 program. We do SMAW Welding. Proposed courses that we have are Construction Mathematics. So I do remember someone saying about the basic math skills. So we do offer that in Personal Finance and Life Management. We have a lot of opportunities within our facilities to have a lot of these vocational programming taught to our offenders to give our community the resources to get employees. It's our biggest struggle and barrier right now is trying to find instructors to come inside our facility. We have all the equipment, we have the classroom space, we just don't have the instructors that are licensed to teach these classes so we could get the skills that we need to put our offenders out in the community and be successful.
And I would also add that over the last couple of months, we've added another classification of inmate, and that's our high minimum, meaning that they'll be housed in our facility, but they'll be allowed to go out into the community and participate in the various programs. So for example, Building and Trades Union, we're in discussions with William Stanley to talk about how our offenders can participate in his apprenticeship program. Hope for Prisoners has a truck driving training through Ahern. that they present. We're trying to get offenders out to be able to attend that as well. So we created this high minimum custody in order to get those offenders that were struggling. And I don't know if you guys are aware with Assembly Bill 236, which reduced the sentencing of a lot of inmates. So now when they come into our department, they're leaving relatively quickly, which has limited the number of minimum custody as well as community trustee inmates that we have to choose from within our system. And that's one of the reasons why we created the high minimum, to make up for that shortfall and get more guys involved in career opportunities. Another thing, I know you guys talked about a wage that you guys are looking for. Our department also believes in a wage we're looking at between $18 and $22. The reason for that dollar amount is because in order for someone to come out and be able to support themselves and their family, that wage right there is more conducive to what we're trying to do. We're not just trying to change the lives of that one individual, but if that one individual can make at least $18 to $22 an hour, he also changes the lives of his wife and possibly his kids as well. So now instead of taking one person out of poverty, you're taking 4 out of poverty and moving in the right direction. We're also looking at NRS 209.417 offenders to have access to the internet. That's something that we're presenting a BDR. If you guys don't know, a bill draft request to the legislation for them to approve. We feel that will be unanimously approved, which allows for more technology to come into our facilities for certification, job applications, testing for their certification, whether it be welding, truck driving, what have you. Also the opportunity for telemed and things of that nature in the courts as well. So we're looking at trying to use it in many different ways. What else am I forgetting? It's like I'm rushing through it. No, it's something I'm missing right now, but we're just doing our best. One of the things we would definitely like for any employers that's on today to let them know, hey, we're looking for instructors. We're looking for an opportunity for you to come into our facilities, provide the necessary training for the different occupations that you're looking for, and going through the logistics and distribution manual that you guys presented to us with the different jobs identified. Some areas it's going to be difficult for us, but a lot of the areas which Mr. Russell identified earlier, we have a lot already there. ASC certification is another big one. We have it in the north and the south, and we teamed up with the Capanzi group up in the northern region of the state to where they're getting trained. And although it's only ASC 1, where they can change oil, tires, things of that nature, but it's a start. And we're going to try to up those certifications to where it gets a little higher, ASC 2 or 3, to where they can make more money with doing more important work on vehicles. But those are some of the things that we're trying to do and team up with our community partners in order to bring these different programs into our facilities and provide these guys an opportunity to be successful once released. And that's our presentation. And again, Ms. Fleming, I'll send you our presentation that we have prepared. I just had to streamline it a little bit because of time.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here and sharing all of that incredible information. I have a quick question for you. Can you help us get a sense of how many folks you work with, on a monthly basis, typically that you're looking to match with employers or to find that work experience?
Well, it's not just us working with the inmate population, it's also P&P. A lot of these guys are being paroled. So we're releasing approximately 400 plus offenders every month. So you're looking at about 4,800 guys that are coming out of our prisons, and they're either going to be discharged, which means they have no paper on them, they can go do whatever they want, or those that's going to be on parole and they're mandated to find a job as part of their parole conditions. So about 4,800 a year, 400 total a month. And our female population, we're really trying to get something going over there. They don't just want to do hair. They want to do everything the men do, welding, apprenticeship programs. They want it all as well. So we're trying to provide a variety of programs there as well. So
wonderful.
That answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think if there are other questions out there, please put them in the chat at this point. I want to be able to answer those questions quickly. But are you so the instructor issue is a huge one, and one that I hope that we'll be able to dive into in this group in the future, not only for corrections, but just across the board, helping industry understand how they can engage with these training programs and put their investment in that way to help strengthen that pipeline.
Right now, our school districts are absolutely amazing. They're coming in and they're providing services. They oversee the ASC program up at NNCC, which is the Northern Correctional Center. We have a big one down at High Desert State Prison. And a lot of the vocational programs that Mr. Russell shared are put on through our school districts. We're trying to get our outside providers to come in and do teaching and training as well. And with our high minimum classification of inmate, we'll be able to send them out of our facilities if they're not able to come in, so they can participate in that as well. So it's looking up, it's getting better, but we still need employers to come in, sit down with us, share their product, and we can go through our program review committee to determine if their curriculum is appropriate for what we're trying to do, and then move forward and work with them there.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Please, please feel free to engage, continue to ask questions in the chat. I am going to welcome our final speaker here. Before I do that, so put your questions in the chat, answer the questions in the chat, but also if you are a partner here that has, we may not have time to introduce folks before 1 o'clock, but we'll keep the meeting open until everybody has shared what they want to share. But if you have upcoming events or other opportunities to engage, please put those in the chat and we'll be sharing all that information and posting it following the meeting. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Director Fred Wager of the Nevada Department of Veterans Services.
Thank you, Amy. I just posted a number of things into the chat because I don't want to take up a lot of time, and you'll get a better idea of what I'm doing with those posts once I talk about this. I do want to let everybody know there's between 225 to 250,000 veterans in the state already. Annually, we are getting notice of about 3,000 service members getting out and indicating they're either staying in or coming to Nevada. And so one of the questions I had ahead of time was, what are occupations that work well? And I will tell you that Chelsea posted that list, and I looked at it and I went, that's the jobs. I mean, I want everybody to realize that service members aren't just security guards, and we get a lot of that. I appreciate the casinos hiring them, but often when these service members are getting out of service, they're like, oh my God, I got to go to work. I got to go find a place to live. I got a place to put my kids in school. And they're just kind of in a panic mode, and they take the first thing that comes along. And often it is not the job that they're actually trained for. Think about the airplane mechanic, think about the teacher, the nurses, I heard a lot about transportation. I heard about mechanics. When you've got somebody coming out of the military, they're already trained. And so we're working with the boards within the state, trying to make it an easier transition to come to Nevada and go to work. That includes the spouses. We need to make sure we're including all of that. So the challenge is making sure employers know that they have trained individuals coming out of the military, and trained individuals who have been out of the military for a while and often are looking for work, especially the young ones coming out. So I just love that list because I got excited when I saw that. But so how do you engage with them? So if we can get the word out to the employers that say, hey, you know, you've got all these military personnel coming out. Maybe you need to be contacting the Family and Readiness Center out at Nellis Air Force Base, or Fallon Naval Air Station, or the Military Readiness Center over across the border in California. You've got a number of people getting out, and they're all over the state. And a lot of them are moving back to Nevada because we've got great benefits here in the state. And we do our best to get the word out about that. There is what's called a National Transition Assistance Program, and it's Department of Defense and Department of Labor and Department of Veterans Affairs. And they do some training for folks getting out, but they don't talk about state benefits. And so we have recently gotten under the bill from last legislature, AB 22, we started the Nevada Transition Assistance Program. And I put that in the chat as well, because I'd like everybody to go look at that, especially at the employment piece of that, because there's a lot of things that people don't know about Nevada, that veterans don't know, that the military getting out do not know about opportunities in Nevada. And so there's our job postings, there's the state postings for people who want to work for the state. There's also DETR. All of those are on there. And then there's the Patriot Employer Program. Often employers know they want to hire veterans, but what's the benefit to them for hiring veterans? What's the tax incentives and all that? And so there is a short little course online that we have. And once they take that course, usually HR or whoever does that, they get a certificate signed by the governor and a decal for their windows so they can show that, hey, we're interested in hiring veterans. And so we've got that on there as well. You know, we have our own issues in NDVS with hiring folks right now, just like everybody else. We can't raise wages as easily as the civilian counterparts because we work for the state. And so everything's got to be done through the legislature. I will tell you, we have two categories right now where we're really struggling to keep people employed, and that's our certified nursing assistants at the homes. We have 2 veterans homes, and the one in Boulder City, we're doing everything we can. We actually started a certified nursing assistant academy. And so we train them and we pay them while we're training them. And then we ask them if they're willing to stay. We can't force them to do so, but we ask them, and we've been pretty successful with that. So that's moving forward. And I know Amy Stevens is on the line today, and she's in charge of our 2 veterans homes as well as our healthcare initiatives. And then we have our cemeteries in Boulder City and Fernley. And the Boulder City one, we are looking for grounds equipment operators. And both of these are starting wage jobs. And you can think about the grounds equipment operator that's out there digging graves and interring people and dealing with the grieving families, working for a pretty low wage in the state. And so we're having difficulty with those as well. But I just want to show you, we're just like everybody else. We're begging for people to come to work, and often they get there and they work a day and go, oh, this is hard, I'm done. So we're always looking for that. But we're always looking for ways to reach out to employers. It's difficult to do so because they're looking for specific ones. But if they just think about the military folks being just another community, and these folks are moving from that community into the next community, which is here in Nevada, and what can we do to bring them in and accept the training they have to go to work. And I'll just ask Amy if I've missed anything on that.
Sorry.
No, it was perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay. So Amy, I'm going to end it right there because I know we're running out of time. Looks like we had about 4 minutes left of the scheduled time. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to ask. Answer.
Thank you. So I don't see any questions in the chat. But I do appreciate the back and forth with other presenters. I think that's really valuable to get those addressed there, and I'll share those after the meeting. In addition to all the contact information for those that presented. Thank you so much for being here. So I'm going to move on to agenda item number 8 for some quick partner introductions. Please share in particular key resources or opportunities or calls to action. This is again speaking on behalf of the workforce, the stakeholders, the clients, the population that you're working with to help match them to these employment opportunities. You can use the raise hand feature, or I will go ahead and call on you if I see you not raising your hand. Let me see, there we go. Upcoming events. Okay, Nancy, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to mention, because there were some comments about the workforce preparation skills as well as basic foundational skills. And I wanted to let everyone know that adult education can work with any individual in the federally funded program, any individual needing foundational skills or English as a second language. And many of our programs do provide work site classes. So if you have employers that are interested, they can contact me, or they can contact one of our 7 federally funded adult education programs. The adult high school diploma programs that are state funded, individuals must need their high school diploma or equivalency to participate. But for the federally funded program, they can be at any education level as long as they still need English as a second language or foundational skills. So please know that we are available for services. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other partners that would like to introduce themselves, share a little bit about their program, and in particular, any upcoming opportunities to engage? So I will, I'll share opportunity to engage. So I'm with the Governor's Office of Workforce Innovation, as I mentioned, and I'll be sharing some information in the follow-up for a series in the NEPRIS for Nevada platform, where we have 3 events in the fall that we're looking to line up industry to speak to classrooms virtually. And September will be around education. So both K-12 and post-secondary education, what it takes to become a teacher or an instructor. So that could be a good opportunity there for some of you to speak to that. In addition to supporting roles, so the other jobs in education that folks are looking to fill. October will align with National Manufacturing Month, and November will be focused on STEM in Nevada. We also are working with the Nevada Department of Education to place teacher externs, and just want to thank those of you on the call who have been supporting that. It's tremendously valuable. We've had 33 teachers apply this year and are working to match those with employers across the state. So I'll be sharing a little bit about some of the teachers that are still looking for their matches. And then I'll also be sharing on behalf of the Children's Cabinet a family-friendly employer survey. And again, thank you to those of you that have shared that out. But we are interested in getting that data, some of it which was mentioned earlier about the employers that are providing a little bit more flexibility and benefits around family support for their workforce with families. Those are my opportunities. And I see Matthew came off mute. Did you want to share?
I did. Can you hear me okay? I just dropped some information there in the chat to let everybody know about the Northern Nevada Workforce Alliance meetings that are going on. We're convening employers from all sectors, other community-based organizations, and stakeholders in the Northern Nevada area. Just meeting. We talk a lot about the same things that were covered today. We're very interested in the high demand occupations and hearing that local wisdom and that perspective that employers can give. And so we're meeting the 3rd Thursday of every month at the Reno Town Mall on the 2nd floor at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Everybody's welcome to attend. I know a lot of people on the line here have either spoken or participated, and we just appreciate your interest, and we're going to be at each of these sector councils to get that feedback as well and stay in the loop.
Wonderful. Thank you, Matthew. Any other partners that want to introduce themselves? Oh, George, your audio is not coming through. I don't hear you. Keep working on it. And if it pops open, then I'll give you the floor. Sorry about that.
Is that better?
Yes, there you go.
It helps when you turn it on, right? I just wanted to say, first of all, to Fred, I'm working right now with the healthcare providers, HEALS, which is here in Southern Nevada. I guess I'm not sure if they're working in Northern, but here in Southern. And one of the things we're going to be doing, an initiative is the college reintegration initiative for people who leave school prior to successfully getting their certificate or 2-year degree. We're going to connect them more directly with a group or cohort of service providers in healthcare. So what I'd like to offer to you is connect with you, Fred, directly, because I know the power of veterans, people who have that military experience. And what I'd like to do is get a group, again, starting with healthcare, working through HEALS. We'll get a group, maybe 40, 50 different companies that will agree to interview and hire when appropriate those individuals who especially those transitioning service personnel, but it can also be the veterans who are already out. But we want to work with them and their spouses. And so that way they're going to have a direct connection in addition to the employee and V that obviously will be posted. We're going to create a direct connection. So if someone immediately comes into that system, that pipeline, they will be their skill set, their profile will go directly to this group of companies. And then the companies in real time can say, yes, I'd like to interview so-and-so or whatever. So I'd just like to offer that to you, Fred. And again, I'm George Hempy, Director of Workforce Development for the Vegas Chamber. And I'll put my phone number and email right now in the chat. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you so much. We will share that out with the group. Okay, so before we finish up here, I need to ask if any voting members arrived after roll call. Please identify yourself at this time so you're marked present. I can see everybody's names. Oh, there are 2 people on the phone. Okay, hearing none, we will move on to agenda item number 9, which is public comment. Although many of you have had the opportunity to share, and I very much appreciate that, this is a required space for other members of the public to provide comment. As a reminder, no formal action may be taken on any issues not included in the posted agenda, and public comment will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Please raise your hand to be recognized for public comment. Oh, yes, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just wanted to give a bit of an introduction about myself. My name is Angie Rojas, and I am with the Commission on Minority Affairs. Just wanted to say that all of this information is great, and if anyone can send me any invites to any events, that will be great. One of the issues that the Commission oversees is employment. So all of this is great input, great information. I will put my contact information so anyone interested can reach out to me. And that was it. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Anyone else? All right. Hearing no further comments, I will move to adjourn the meeting. And I wanted to thank you all for your very thoughtful engagement and participation today.